tears through makeshift shelters at a Muslim religious retreat in Senegal. Dozens more were injured in the fire. Others were hurt in the stampede it caused amongst panicked worshippers. Also, a battle between local producers and importers of frozen chicken heats up in Benin. Poultry's big business in the country, but with a huge profit to be made by buying from Europe and selling on to Nigeria, local poultry farmers feel edged out. And we head to Ethiopia, where in Addis Ababa, 14 months after a new light rail system's opening, many residents in the city's network of overcrowded minibuses and taxis think that they remain the only option. The huge infrastructure project hasn't delivered the easing of traffic congestion that they'd hoped for. Now, at least 23 people have died in a blaze that tore through a religious retreat in Senegal. The fire triggered a stampede when it broke out near the town of Medina Gounass in the southeast. President Macky Sall is due to head to the site on Friday. For more on what happened, we're joined by Sophia Christensen. She's in Dakar for us. Sophia, do we have any more idea of the circumstances of the fire?
No, not really. So the fire broke out yesterday afternoon near the southeastern village of Medina Gounass. And this is a site where thousands of Muslim pilgrims had come from across the region to gather for an annual spiritual retreat. Once it started, it spread rapidly by a combination of strong winds and makeshift shelters. And firefighters really struggled to bring the situation under control. By evening, almost 80% of the campsite was destroyed. 23 people have now been confirmed dead and many others injured.
So do we know what happened? What may have caused the fire?
Yeah, no. So authorities will open an investigation, but for the time being, we still do not know what may have caused it. There is speculation that it could have been triggered by a cigarette butt or by the explosion of a gas cylinder. Although it is worth noting that this happened in an extremely hot and very, very arid part of the country, where small fires are not an uncommon occurrence. And in fact, before the event, the organization committee and the village mayor had voiced concern about the lack of proper water and electricity supplies at the campsite. But infrastructure that was previously promised by the authorities to improve the situation was never delivered.
Thanks very much, Sophia Christensen, there for us in Dakar. Well, at least 97 people are missing after their boat capsized off the coast of Libya on Thursday. Around 120 migrants had originally been on board when the vessel fell apart not far from Tripoli. The local Coast Guard believes all the passengers were African, of whom only about 24 have been rescued. Since the beginning of the year, around 600 migrants have died or gone missing in Libya's waters as they try and make the dangerous journey to Europe. Before that, migrants risk brutal abuse at the hands of people smugglers, including being forced into slavery. Some who've witnessed the appalling trade and returned home are still traumatized by what they've been through.
I will not advise any Gambian or any citizen as a black man to take this journey, because what I experienced there is just like a slavery is running in Libya for the blacks. They say slavery is finished, but this. Slavery is existing in Libya every fucking day and night. They sell people just like the way they sell goats and rams. They will price you, you are sitting. You cannot do nothing there.
Political tensions in Zambia continue to ratchet up over the arrest this week of opposition leader Hichilema Hakainde. His lawyers and family say that orders have been given to prevent them from seeing him. Hakainde was taken forcibly from his home on Tuesday and charged with treason for allegedly obstructing President Edgar Lungu's motorcade. Hakainde's UPND party says that he's the victim of political persecution. He and Lungu are old rivals, and he accuses the leader of having rigged a victory in last year's polls. Well, police deny refusing Hakainde access to his rights and also claim that they've not been politically pressured to pursue him. Well, frozen chicken is a hot ticket for business in Benin. The country imports around 150,000 tonnes of poultry from Europe every year, and there's big money to be made in then exporting much of that to neighbouring Nigeria. However, for local producers, the market is less than welcoming. They feel that they're being edged out and that there is little interest from the government in supporting the sale of homegrown chicken.
Massive imports of chicken from Europe and Brazil have led to a fall in prices in Benin. These men have been importing frozen chicken from the EU for several years now. These impressive chicken legs come from Poland.
The people here like big chicken legs, and in the EU they make sure big ones are produced.
All these imports mean there are fewer and fewer local poultry farmers.
Nous avons 9000 poules pondeuses ici.
Constant Kinoucon only sells eggs now. His chicken meat would be too expensive compared to the imported produce. Benin's government is not doing anything because it makes more than 70 million euros a year from the imports, which are taxed when they enter the country. That's 2% of the nation's budget. In fact, 80% of the imports are then exported to Benin's vast neighbour, Nigeria, and its 186 million inhabitants. These packs of frozen chicken that are lying in the sun are about to embark on a long journey in a lorry that is not refrigerated. Frozen chicken in hot temperatures is not ideal, but these imports have represented a huge blow for many of Benin's poultry farmers.
Well, Ethiopia's electric light railway system was only inaugurated last year. It was supposed to be a game changer for the capital. But despite the government's promises that it would make a massive difference to road congestion, many living in Addis Ababa are less than impressed by the impact it's had on getting around the city.
Long queues for the minibus, still a common sight in Addis Ababa. That's despite a modern tramway that started operating in the Ethiopian capital more than a year ago. Not everybody is impressed with the $475 million project.
You can wait for 30 minutes for the tram to come. They promised it would arrive every 6 minutes when it first began operating.
The Chinese-funded tramway is the first in sub-Saharan Africa. It was hailed as a major step in the country's development and is now used by 120,000 people every day. But the trams, just like the buses, are under strain.
So with this number of trains, it's totally impossible to alleviate the transportation problem. But we can see that it has played its own positive role, because we have managed to transport more than 50 million.
Of the 41 light rail cars, a third are currently undergoing repairs.
How come they malfunction within just a year? They should buy good cars that work well. And they should limit the number of passengers in each train.
The tram is cheaper than the bus and is supposed to be faster. But Addis has a rapidly growing population of 4 million plus. And now it's not just the so-called Blue Donkey minibuses that are overcrowded and delayed.
For a couple of $100. UN investigators in Libya speak to African migrants who say there is a shameful trade in human lives there. Victims suffer extortion, abuse, and are even murders. Also, as Gambia's new government tries to encourage some of the thousands of exiles who fled during the 2-decade-long rule of Yahya Jammeh to return, we meet one who has already done so, an entrepreneur who's come back from the States to take her place in this new phase of her homeland. And around half a century ago, Egypt's Jewish population numbered over 100,000. But today, only a handful remain, less than 2 dozen. Many struggle to come to terms with the local demise of their culture. But first, the UN has uncovered a disturbing slave trade of migrants in Libya. The International Organization for Migration has taken testimony from Africans who've told of traffickers buying and selling people in car parks for as little as $200. It's a brutal face of the migrant crisis. Martin Pollard has this report.
As seen here, some arrests have been made to try to combat the illegal trafficking of migrants. But in the political vacuum that is Libya, smugglers and armed groups still thrive. Now, the International Organization for Migration, or IOM, says it has discovered another horror story to add to the country that it calls the Valley of Tears.
Migrants also are being sold, and selling human beings is becoming a trend among smugglers as the smuggling networks in Libya are becoming stronger and stronger.
Libya has emerged as the gateway for African migrants who hope to reach Europe. West African migrants interviewed by IOM have told of being captured by armed groups, being held, beaten and later being auctioned off in a market-like setting in the southern Libyan city of Sabah.
If you go to the market and you can pay between $200 and $500 to get a migrant that will work with you on your daily jobs or support your work. Many of them escape, many of them are kept in bondage, and many of them are even prisoned inside an area where they are forced to work on a daily basis.
Others reportedly find the armed groups try to extort money from them or their families to allow them to continue towards the Libyan coast. Without that, some are abandoned to die in the desert. Many of those that do reach the Libyan coast are then packed on ill-equipped vessels. Far too often this ends in tragedy. More than 600 are known to have died at sea since the start of the year.
Yahya Jammeh's 22-year rule of Gambia came to an end in January. The new government's now trying to persuade some of the tens of thousands of exiled dissidents to return. One of the first people to do so was entrepreneur Fatou Touré, who set up a small communications firm. She told her story to our correspondents.
New offices for a new life. Fatou returned from America a few weeks ago, just as the Gambia's new government came to power. A 30-something, she set up a communications agency. But there have been challenges, not least daily blackouts.
Yes, the power is the biggest challenge, the power. You're having a lot of difficulty setting up. That is the main problem. But the others, we're getting there. We're optimistic because it's a new government. The environment is changed. For me, the greatest thing on earth is to come home.
Fatou spent just over 3 years in exile after escaping arrest by agents loyal to ex-President Yahya Jammeh. Her crime? Failing to testify against a friend.
I left this kind of taxi, the yellow taxis. So I had a miniskirt on, a top, slippers. It's very, very emotional. I never thought I would go through that, but when you hear the stories of how people escape from the Gambia, you're like, is that really real?
She's set up home just outside the capital. She's enjoying life in the new Gambia.
Now I feel like, I can do whatever I want. I can talk and say whatever I want. But I'm glad that I'm away from Trump and all his crazy policies. I'm just glad to be home.
But Fatou is one of only a trickle of successful exiles to return to the Gambia so far. The country has one of the world's highest migration rates per capita.
The Twa are often dubbed Rwanda's invisible people. Also known as pygmies, today they live on the fringes of society and often in poverty. Our team sent us this report.
It's an age-old custom handed down from generation to generation. Liberata and her daughter are potters, a practice now synonymous with the Twa in Rwanda. Living alongside Hutu and Tutsis, Twa represent less than 1% of the country's population. At 65, Liberata says life here used to be different.
At the time, I lived in a forest not far from the river. Then the forest disappeared and we had to resettle in a village. We survived by hunting and gathering.
Still, she looks back fondly on the hard days in the forest. Very few Twa own and cultivate land. Most of them make and sell these clay pots. But at 50 Rwandan francs per pot, less than 10 cents, Rwanda's potters barely get by.
We hardly earn anything with this. Sometimes we can't sell them all. Sometimes we can't even eat. It's really not a good life.
Most potters lack the means to go to school or access health care. Often, they feel isolated from society.
Sometimes people are racist. We were reminded we are Twa, and that hurts.
Since 2012, just one man represents the Twa at the highest level of the state. Senator Zephyrin Kalimba, an advocate for the community, believes this responsibility should be shared.
There is always this inferiority complex that traps them. That's why it's hard for them to integrate into Rwandan society. If they had changed their mindset earlier, they could go to school like the others. They could work and integrate into the national community.
But the senator is optimistic. The Potters are now recognized as a vulnerable population, opening the door for government support, in the hope that this ancestral culture does not entirely disappear from Rwanda.
A look now at the handful of Jews that make up their community in Egypt. Population numbers plummeted in the mid-20th century, and now the few that remain struggle to preserve the remnants of their local heritage.
In this Cairo synagogue, Magda Haroun shows centuries-old Torah scrolls kept inside the Ark, a small piece of Egypt's vanishing Jewish heritage. Between 80,000 and 120,000 Jews lived in the country until the mid-20th century. Today, only 18 remain.
Our numbers used to be bigger. But because of the old age of our members, at least 2 or 3 of them die every year.
Magda is president of Cairo's Jewish community, tasked with helping to preserve its heritage. She's one of only 6 Jews living in the Egyptian capital. At 91 years old, her mother, Marcel, dreads to see centuries of Jewish history fade.
J'en suis très affectée.
It really affects me. And it makes me sad. But there's nothing I can do. It's too late.
Many Egyptian Jews left or were forced out following the Arab-Israeli War of 1948. Amir Ramses made a 2013 documentary on the community. Screening the film in Cairo cinemas was a struggle before he eventually obtained clearance.
A lot of people still consider that we're in a state of political animosity with Israel, and some still mix the words Jew and Israeli because of that. But I can say that this situation is changing. Little by little, some people are starting to differentiate between Jewish people and those who belong to a state with which there could be a political struggle.
Officially, the government makes no distinction between Pharaonic, Islamic, Coptic, and Jewish heritage. And the Antiquities Minister says he set up a committee in 2016 to list all Jewish monuments.
All antiquities have the same importance for us because they all belong to the Egyptian civilization.
But some of the country's synagogues, like this one in the coastal city of Alexandria, need restoration. Although Egyptian Jews have been spared recent attacks targeting Christians, many prefer to keep a low profile, hoping to preserve for a little while longer their once flourishing community.
Now to Kenya, where there is a big push for developers to prioritize clean energy in new builds. It's one of the countries leading the continent's push towards solar power, which is generally seen as being more cost-effective than grid-sourced electricity. Have a look.
It may look like an ordinary estate, yet all 400 houses in this residential community south of Nairobi are equipped with solar panels.
Now everyone is making sure that they install a solar system during the time of building.
The initiative, which is part of a greater push towards renewable energies in Kenya, has helped cut electricity costs by nearly half.
So we're able to have hot water throughout the day, depending on the usage, and also in the night.
Experts argue the fast-dropping costs of solar power, combined with plenty of sun and a huge demand for cheap electricity, hold huge economic potential for Kenya. An analysis that hasn't escaped authorities. The country introduced a regulation in 2012 forcing buildings using over 100 liters of water a day to install solar heaters. At Kenya's Climate Innovation Center, there are hopes similar legislation will soon follow.
Kenya, lying on the equator, has some of the best solar installation in the globe. If the solar energy is well harnessed, it could actually help in stability of our grid.
Each of these solar units costs about $800 to install, a high upfront cost compared to traditional fuels. Yet experts say the technology could pay for itself in the long run. Experimentation with various solar uses is fast expanding in Kenya. Nairobi's Garden City Mall is already equipped with over 3,000 solar panels.